Welcome to the Reimagine podcast. Each week, give yourself 30 minutes and meet the people working hard to create the future of insurance today.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. And Laura, we have two special guests today, correct? Do you want to introduce them?
Sure. So lucky with us today, we have Blair Baldwin, the founder of AgeUp, and we have Ramsey Smith, the founder of Alex FYI, joining us today.
Yeah, welcome. Ramsey, hey, welcome.
Thank you.
And Ramsey's joining us from an undisclosed location, no video, just audio. And I think he's mobile. So,
Yeah.
Blair. So Blair, thanks for coming on the show. We had you on that annuity show. Was that 6 months ago? Could have been.
No, time is so strange in these COVID times. It feels like an eternity ago, but I'm pretty sure it was only 6 or 7 months. But
Right.
COVID times are like dog years, so it really feels like a lot longer.
They really are. So, first of all, thanks for coming in and being a participant of our Reimagine Retirement series. If you haven't checked it out or read our white papers or gone to our webpage, please do. But now that we have you here, and especially we've got a different audience, can you sort of step back and tell us what is AgeUp? What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah. So AgeUp is actually a product. It's sold by the Haven Life Insurance Agency, which is the startup subsidiary of MassMutual, one of these really big sort of old school carriers. And the founding narrative of AgeUp is really, it's a fascinating story. I had founded an insurtech startup a couple of years ago that we ended up selling to MassMutual. And we got this really cool open-ended challenge, really from the sort of leadership of MassMutual and Haven down, which was, hey, you and your sort of startup team, you guys are really creative and innovative. Can you come up with a new type of annuity that's all digital, direct to consumer, financially accessible to everybody, and really suited towards some type of like a mass market problem? When I say mass market, like not sort of an affluent customer or even a mass affluent, but just sort of, everyday folks. And that was sort of the box that we had to play in. And I really like thinking in terms of analogies. And so when we had this set of constraints, the analogy for me that came to mind is actually one very much of term life insurance. Term life insurance is a product that pretty much universally everybody says you should have because it's a low cost and it protects against the small risk that you'll die sort of younger than expected. And the thing that got me really thinking is, hey, is there another product that exists on that other sort of bell curve of mortality, if you will, a product that really protects against longevity that would look very much like life insurance, except in the inverse. And that was really like the kernel of the idea that led to AgeUp. And then what we did is, we kind of looked at this to say, all right, concept is basically like term life insurance in reverse, or the mirror image of term life insurance. Is this a real problem? And it turns out, if you look at any of the actuarial studies on longevity, it's actually a real problem, although a happy problem of people living very long lives. And so if you look at, say, the Society of Actuaries, like their little longevity tool, and you take a healthy 65-year-old woman, she actually has an over 50% chance of making it into her 90s. And it's about 10% or even 12% chance of making it to 100, which is just like incredible. So the problem's real. The next part of this was, is this a perceived problem that people actually recognize? And then we did a lot of market research, and we turned out that, about a third of sort of baby boomers, those aged 50 to 65, really do believe they're going to live into their 90s or 100. And then we also asked their kids. So these are sort of adult millennials. And they also think that, a third of people that are roughly in their 60s are going to live into their 90s or 100. And everybody agrees that if you happen to live this long, finances can get really tricky. And so that's why we created this product. And I'll pause there because I know I just said a whole lot all at once.
So I think one of the things that's interesting is that you talk about how it's nice that there's a strong perception that it is a risk, because one of the things that I find interesting is that that there's a difference between talking about the average life of anybody starting at age 0 versus somebody that's already reached 65. And it does go into the 90s. So a lot of people that are already there don't necessarily realize how much longer they're likely to live. So it's great that people are aware. Did that surprise you?
A little bit. I'm not gonna lie. We had a few sort of wagers around the office about what the survey results would find when we ran this sort of market research. And I suspected that there was going to be a group of people that really did believe in their own longevity, mainly because they might have relatives, like a parent or grandparent or cousin who had lived sort of exceptionally long lives. It turns out that, even I sort of underestimated the number of people who really do believe in their sort of own longevity. And so it was a pleasant surprising that really helped kind of advance the cause of developing this product, which is really an annuity that takes the shape of lots of small sort of monthly contributions, as low as $25 a month, that then turns into an income stream sometime in the 90s up to age 100. And by sort of creating this annuity that really pushes the annuitization date so far into the future, it uses a lot of the same kind of actuarial principles as life insurance, things like mortality credits that really kind of boost the return once the payouts start.
So its survey proved that many people believe they're going to turn into vampires. Is that correct?
Pretty much, or at least a portion of the population believes.
For a portion, yeah. So there is a market segment out there of of fans. So interesting in terms of beliefs of how I believe the world will operate versus how it actually will. Now you mentioned the kids, right? The kids are the parents, and we talked about it just briefly before the show, but. I've had a lot of arguments around, I should say, debates, not really arguments, debates with people around how do you effectively target people in older age markets? Is it just buy ads on television, at 8:00 at night on, or 7:00 for Jeopardy, or do you target the kids? Now, I'm presuming you've tried both. What's the, do you find any like kids, wanting to buy this stuff for their parents? Just to protect them from having to take care of their adults and their parents in older age?
Paul, it's a great question because this was one of our main hypotheses when we launched the product was that, there were going to be a lot of sort of adult children, so people in their 30s and 40s who have parents at or nearing retirement, and they realize that if their parents are lucky enough to go on to live sort of exceptionally long lives, they will likely run out of money. And if that happens, the adult children will likely sort of step in and take care of them. And that was the hypothesis. And what we found, because we really tried to market this pretty heavily, is that while we could generate a lot of interest from those sort of adult children, their lives are complex, their wallets are limited, and it was really hard converting that interest into sales and basically having them prioritize this problem over all of the other problems that a typical sort of middle America family faces. And that's especially true in the, over the last 12 months during this crazy pandemic time when honestly so many families have been impacted in such terrible ways that even carving out a little extra money for anything can be a challenge.
So having a fully digital product with, it sounds a multiple customer base potentially, what are some of those additional lessons you've learned during the pandemic? I mean, things have changed in a lot of ways. People have gone more digital than they were, a year and a half ago. But what other learnings have you picked up along the way so far?
It's a really great question. And we were actually fortunate through timing to run the same survey now 3 times. So we ran this survey, a survey in like kind of early February of last year. So right before the world went crazy, to, I think it was about 1,200 people aged, 50 to 75, and asked them all about sort of like longevity, retirement finances, when they expected to run out of money, things like that. Then obviously the world changed. Right around this time last year, it started changing. And we essentially reran that survey, I think late March, early April. And then we actually ran it a third time very recently, literally just a couple of weeks ago. And what we found is actually perceptions around longevity and personal finances and retirement finances are remarkably stable, and they have been across this whole wild ride that we've all been on. And so many of our learnings are actually less to do about this specific time period that we're in and more to do about kind of the customer use case that we are finding is working, and how people are sort of naturally configuring the problem. And so let me sort of dissect those two elements of it. In terms of the customer use case, as I kind of alluded to, it turns out that right now, it's very difficult to get sort of adult children to sort of move from interest to purchase for even a digital annuity that's purpose-built to be slick and very kind of accessible and sort of low friction. And so we started moving kind of like last spring into really just focusing on people in their 50s and 60s, because they're the ones that are sort of directly facing this longevity risk. And from there, we really did a lot of experimentation to figure out sort of what is it that people liked about this product and what they were selecting. Although we designed the product to be very low friction and have just really two selections, what age you want the product to start kicking out income, and whether you want your the premiums you put in to get returned to your beneficiaries. Even though there's really only those two selections, it actually ends up being a little bit complicated because those two selections end up having really big impacts on pricing, like 10x impacts. Like somebody putting $50 a month could go from, $400 a month of income under one configuration to literally 14,000 in another configuration. But we learned through this experiment about positioning the product and how people were choosing it. Actually, the thing that's really resonating with people is a annuity that is almost like how do I sort of say this? Like a hedge on longevity. Like they get some nice income stream in their early 90s. But then if they don't make it there, their return of premium sort of kicks the money back out to their beneficiaries, whether it's for a sort of a small inheritance, if you will, or to cover things like, funeral and final expenses. And that was a really interesting twist in our story, because originally we were looking at this as a pure insurance product whereby you put in a little bit of money, and if you die before this time, you get nothing in return. And we're now starting to focus way more on the use case of folks wanting kind of like this sort of like a nice little benefit on longevity, but with some sort of guarantees that if they do pass earlier, that their family will get something. It's been a really, really interesting journey.
So this is interesting. So the people are almost using it as a final expense possibility, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's explicitly not final expense insurance,
right?
And so,
right.
And we obviously can't sort of market it or sort of talk about it like final expense insurance. But the concept being of, hey, I'm going to put a little bit of money aside every month, and if I happen to live a very long time, I'll get an income stream. And if not, then my beneficiaries will get, a couple $1,000s to more, depending on how much money they put in. Seems to be resonating very well with people.
That's a big trade-off. I mean, it's right to your point. Like the difference between checking the cash refund box and not is really quite substantial. And I guess my question is is that something you saw change during COVID, or is that also something that's been fairly stable?
Interestingly enough, it's been pretty stable. I think that when we first launched the product, we may have had some mental blinders on because we designed it really for true long tail longevity, people living to age 100 and beyond. And so we weren't really attuned to these other use cases until we kind of started noticing in the data what was happening, and talking to our customer service reps when they were talking to customers and what they were hearing from actual people. And that made us reconsider how we think about the product.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting market, interesting problem. Prior company, we ended up with a block of they were I don't know if they were SPIAs or DIAs, but they were, paying income. And we looked through this, and there were large checks going to people who were like 102, 103, 104. This can't be right. We're saying these to dead people. It turned out like we started doing research, and some of these people had like one person actually, you can't make this one up, was on his fifth heart.
Oh my gosh.
So
wow.
You've got some real extremes out there. Now, this person obviously was very affluent. By the way, the check we were sending every month was enormous. I think we've got some real, when you start to get out there, Blair, I'm not an economist but it feels like you've got some strange tail risks based on economics, based on your economic situation, very ultra wealthy versus, as you say, somebody who says, I didn't get final expense, or I got some coverage. If worst happens, I'm not going to bleed. I've got my independence. If I don't know, worst case, but if I'm really do live long, I'm taken care of. If I live shorter than I want, I'm still taking care of the people I care about. So interesting mix of needs. Maybe just switch gears and talk about the whole sort of annuity market and product market fit going forward. Because look, interest rates, they're not going anywhere, right? And income annuities depend on interest rates to drive this stuff. Tontines, as I learned, Ramsey, in one of our other discussions with Bruno Karn, I didn't even realize tontines were illegal, right?
Oh yeah. AgeUp basically started as a tontine concept.
Okay.
So
Talk about that. Yeah.
I effectively pitched the CEO of Mass Mutual on doing a tontine, and he was like, it's a little illegal. And I'm like, all right. Well, why don't we call this a synthetic tontine and try to figure out how we could take a normal sort of approved annuity chassis and then modify it to look a little bit more like a tontine. And that's effectively what we did with sort of the heavy use of the mortality credits. But Paul, your question is like how to think about annuities in this sort of low interest rate environment. And to some degree, the audience that we're trying to speak to, they're not actually buying annuities anyway, because this is a group of people who aren't working with a financial advisor or working with, sort of a life insurance agent or broker dealer who could actually sell annuities. And what they're looking for is something very different, a low-priced, sort of financially accessible product, not something that takes $10,000 as a minimum sort of pay to play to even buy the product. And so for that audience, the matters of interest rates really aren't kind of driving their behavior more than the problem they're trying to solve. At least that's what we're finding. But from what I've heard, for people who are selling annuities to the typical buyer, things are probably a little bit more difficult these days.
Yeah, well, so go ahead. Sorry, Ramsey.
I was just going to say, Blair, one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is the trade-off between maybe considering a version of this product that had maybe more lump sums versus the periodic payment. What are some of the pros and cons around that? Is it really just like is it really audience driven that you think that like the audience will prefer $25 or $50 or $100 a week or a month? Or are there other reasons why that's?
Yeah, Randy, it's a great question. We tried to make this a very research-driven process from the start, and one of the kind of red flags that we came across is that whenever we pitched concept of sort of lump sums, people felt like it was getting a little too close to gambling, because now they're talking about like, well, if I live to age 100, and by the way, if you do sort of configure AgeUp to the annuitization happens at age 100, the numbers get really big, and they get really, really big if you offer that as a lump sum. People felt queasy. It felt just a little too much like gambling with your lifespan. And so we actually backed off that concept because we just didn't think the market would support it.
Interesting. Now, agents can't sell your product directly, right? I can only get your product if I go directly to your website. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, I think the other advantage though of a lump sum is that you'd probably end up distributing your product through. It'd be easier for agents to get paid to move a product from as more of a lump sum. Is that in your roadmap at all? If I'm a Mass Mutual advisor, eventually I'll be able to offer this to my clients as well. I don't want to have you disclose any proprietary information.
Yeah, and I really can't speak on behalf of sort of the Mass Mutual financial advisors. I can say that our current product design isn't well suited for advisors, and that's because of as filed. For one, the product is filed as a direct-to-consumer non-commissioned product, so that's already kind of a no-no that advisors can't sell it. But secondly, because we designed this really for this sort of mass market, not sort of affluent market segment, the range of premiums that we can take per month goes from $25 to $250. And so if you sort of do the math, there's actually not that much money in this type of annuity. Mm-hmm. And so when we started thinking about it, like, hey, could we just port this one-to-one over to the advisor channel, maybe refile it so it could like accept commissions, we realized is that like, I'm not sure that the economics will be really like well aligned with advisors such that they would sort of want to, take a look at this product. We would probably have to redesign it a little bit.
Right. It'd probably feel more like referring a credit card application, right? For an advisor, applying for a client. Okay. Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
But that doesn't mean that a different configuration of the same concept, idea that annuitization is pushed way out, couldn't work in the advisor channel. You would just probably change some features of the product design, specifically like much larger, allowed for much larger monthly contributions, allowed for like large upfront lump sum contributions. There are all sorts of things that you might want to change.
So you mentioned something earlier about mental blinders. And whenever we have the opportunity to sit with founders, I always like to ask the question, but I'll use your verbiage. So if you were to remove your mental blinders that you had on, what's a piece of advice if you could rewind time about 3 to 5 years? What would you give yourself going into this if you were able to do it again?
Ooh, 3 to 5 years is a long time horizon. Can we, let's narrow it.
Last 1.5 kind of like dog years, as we mentioned. So do they count or do they not? I don't know.
So what I would actually say, I'm going to contradict the statement I made earlier, or I will both confirm and also contradict the statement. We have tried to be really research and process driven in this process of sort of developing and launching this product. And what that meant is, in the early days, we were really sort of running on just what the market research was telling us. And the problem with that is that there is often a large difference between what people say and what they do. And the perfect example of that is this, our original kind of use case for AgeUp, which is millennial kids buying it for their parents. Millennial kids were all about these buying this from their parents. They're like, yes, I want to do it. I'm ready. Sign me up. And it turned out that they didn't do it. And so if I was to kind of relive life all over again, I would have been a little bit more skeptical of some of our early research findings and not sort of looked at the world with as rose-tinted glasses as I might otherwise have done.
So what are the, I don't know what you can share, but like you've learned a lot, and because you're a startup, you're always going to be asking questions and finding different things to change about either the product or the process. Is there anything you can share with us about what we might see from AgeUp in the next 6 months or a year?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if you kind of like look at the last year, we started off really focused on this buy for parent use case. People in their 30s and 40s buying it for their parent. We then sort of moved over to where we are right now. So if you go to the website, it sort of speaks to both audiences and use cases about buying for your parents or buying it for yourself. The next phase of where this product is going, I'm not sure when you're airing this, but I suspect our website will be sort of refreshed and a lot of the tools refreshed by then. And it's really going to focus exclusively on the sort of buying it for yourself. So if you're in your 50s and 60s, and really dialing up the possible configurations of AgeUp that would allow for this return of premium through sort of charts and nice sort of visualizations to get people sort of engaged in that way to sort of buy and configure the product, because that's where we're seeing the most traction. So what you'll probably see over the next 6 months or so is both us continuing to modify sort of the website and the buying experience to reflect all of these possible ways to configure it. And our marketing and positioning also starting to reflect some of the use cases that we really didn't have in mind when we originally built and launched this thing.
And where are people finding you?
So right now we are kind of a mix of sort of social media channels like Facebook. We buy a lot of Facebook ads, and actually lots of sort of content. So sort of third-party content sort of arrangements with folks who write on financial matters and have really good websites and talk about insurance and retirement planning. So think like sponsored posts and things like that.
Yeah, who do you think will the next generation of retirees turn to the way my parents looked at AARP? AARP, good organization. They've done a lot for millions and millions of people. But you just think there must be a community, Blair, that's going to be the next organization like that. Who would you put on your short list for people who are speaking to the near retirees or the mass of retirees?
Oh my gosh. If I knew the answer to that question, I would actually be speaking to that organization. Like, who's on your short list? I'll take some notes.
Yeah.
Well, so Blair, I think that, Paul, I think you're hitting on something very interesting there. So the first sort of controversial thing to ask is like, right, well, is AARP, and this is what you're getting at, right? Is like, is AARP is relevant now? And the second piece of it is like, what should they be doing differently, or what should somebody be doing differently than AARP is doing?
Yeah, these are great questions. I mean, I think one of the things that just fundamentally has changed over the last 20 years is that 20 years ago, not quite 20 years, 15 years ago, I actually did a bunch of consulting to AARP when I was in my sort of like late 20s, early 30s, late 20s. And it struck me at the time how incredibly like influential and massive this organization was, and how many people like read their magazine and sort of got product and sort of life recommendations. This is broader than just AARP, but how people consume and digest media and get information has just fundamentally changed, in the last 15 years. And so, people now go to Facebook and all these other sort of social platforms, and I think there's a lot more sort of peer-to-peer sharing of information and community than maybe there was before. And so my own sort of theory is that, organizations like AARP, may sort of gradually recede into the background as they are replaced by other sort of organic collections of people coming together online. That's just my theory. I could be wrong, though.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a company or an organization, we need to start getting the attention of the 30-year-olds and above now. I think what's interesting is you see a lot of conversations towards 50, 60 and above, but not when people are, in the 30s. So when I went on your website earlier today to learn more, I found it interesting being an adult millennial. Oh, I can help support my mother as she ages gracefully. But at the same time, it'll save me a lot of headache and heartache potentially. So that caught my eye. But what's interesting is for an AARP, I think the next gen of that is someone or something who can provide, content, information, all of the things we're looking for in one place, and then stay relevant to me as I go throughout my financial journey. And I don't think AARP is doing that.
Here's my prediction, Blair. I think it's going to be not started by a magazine, right? I really think that magazine made AARP. Now, it's interesting. What was in the magazine? Thought leadership, right? Ideas, source of information. But what brings a community together? And Laura, it'd be nice to start at age 30, but it's like, that's a long time, so hopefully we find something before now that'll happen. I don't know. Is it going to be like a tiny house manufacturer that that spins up a community that is like self-supporting, shares networks, provides networks for people trying to live a different life in the future? That's what I kind of feel like it's going to be. That it's not like where you'd expect it. It's not a magazine. It's not a discount card company, but it's going to be some other thing that lights fires under people, makes them feel young.
Or 100 little micro communities.
Yes.
It's probably not going to be a single monolith like ARP representing all 50 plus year olds, but 100 little micro communities that are all very specific around people's passion points and lifestyles.
Yeah. So
when do you want to start it?
Yes.
All right. Well, I didn't know we were going to start new ventures today, but I'm game. Count me in.
Yeah. Listen, we're going to flip this podcast into a venture studio. That's what we'll do. So I don't know, Blair, this was great having you on here. Ramsey, any other, questions, thoughts for Blair while we've got him on here? I want a few more, predictions if possible.
So I really liked sort of this discussion of sort of the new version of AARP, frankly. So I hope that Blair, I hope you continue to be part of that discussion, because one of the things that struck me about AARP is that there's a high price of admission for vendors, right? Like you want to advertise their magazine or whatever. Like it's a business now, right? And so I think that like this, what you floated there about micro communities, and I think I think there's potential for something that's more organic, and I think that's a good thing.
Laura, you have a tough question for him, I know, on that card.
I do.
Oh man.
There's so many questions we could ask, but I'll ask one that might not have an answer that's as obvious as what we've already talked about. But I'm always curious as to what is your why, right? So not so much the why of the product, but what is Blair's why? Why do you do this work, and what makes you feel good about it when you go home every night or stay at home and work from home every night?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I fundamentally love creating things and like tackling like big gnarly problems. And so like my sweet spot is actually in the kind of the concept development, pressure testing, like launching sort of a new venture. Like that just makes me really happy. It gets me out of bed. And so, my own personal goals is to keep on doing this. So AgeUp was the first product. We haven't really disclosed anything like publicly, but it's not necessarily secret either that we've got another product launching fairly soon, a really novel short-term disability insurance product, which speaks to an entirely different problem, but that's what I really like doing, is just creating like really good products that solve unmet needs in the market.
Well, this has been great. Blair, thank you. Thanks for your time. Ramsey, I hope you get safely to wherever you're going. And Laura, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Paul and Laura. Thanks so much for having me on.
We want to especially thank today's sponsors, Launch and Symetra.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information about this company and other great startups at imagine.nsre.com.